Ahoy! The New World team has posted some interesting things recently. The first thing I want to look at today is this. There were some statistics that were posted about 2022 and what that meant in numbers for New World. Now, most of those are not particularly interesting because they are just random things like dying to drowning, but two numbers in particular caught my attention. And that's the numbers for legendary armor crafted and legendary weapons crafted. We have around 2,500,000 legendary armor pieces crafted, and I'm guessing that armor pieces includes all 5 normal armor pieces as well as jewelry, because that's usually all classified as armor. Could possibly include shields as well. And then we have 945,000, so nearly 1 million legendary weapons crafted. I would like to use these numbers to make a bit of a point about crafting in New World. So first of all, we have to keep in mind here that these are only the legendary items crafted. Any 599 gear score roll or lower does not count into this, which is very important when it comes to the actual chance to roll a good item through crafting. Now, a lot of the legendary items that would have been crafted here likely aren't even legendary random rolls. Even after all of the changes, it's still fairly expensive to max any crafting profession, so there are a lot of players that have never done it. However, those same players may have been able to craft legendary armor or weapon pieces anyways, because there are a lot of named legendary items that you could craft, like the Voidbend set for example, or many of the event-related items that are locked at 600 gear score. On top of that, it likely also includes weapons and armor that are crafted as named items from expeditions with mutator material and with expedition material. So you get the point, many of these legendary items are likely not random rolls. But what I was curious about is how many best in slot random rolls these numbers would actually result in. So I generously assumed that 70% of the crafts made were random rolls that were legendary, whereas the other 30% made up the item types that I described before. It is likely that the percentage of legendary random rolls is actually a fair bit lower than that, but I'd rather err on the side of caution here. My next estimation for both weapons and armor was that 50% of all items were rolled with no scarab and 20% of all items were rolled with a scarab. Again, a very generous assumption, especially because scarabs only came out toward the end of the year and are significantly more expensive to roll when we consider all the extra materials that you require. With these very generous assumptions in mind, if we are rolling with a scarab, we can lock 2 perks. The first example that I'm going to use here is rolling a weapon, in this case a greatsword, where we are locking transient strikes and any type of elemental attunement. New World Database actually has a very cool feature that allows you to see the roll chance for something when other perks are locked, because we're specifically only looking to roll one specific perk, and since we're only looking at legendary weapons crafted, it is a guaranteed legendary, so we're guaranteed to get one of the perks from the pool. So let's say for this example, our personal best in slot roll would be a Transient Strikes, Attunement, and Keenly Jagged Greatsword. You don't have to agree with these particular perks, it's just an example. The chances are very similar for other effects, often the same chance anyways. The chance to roll Keenly Jagged if you have Transient Strikes and an Elemental Attunement locked, and you are guaranteed to get a legendary, is 3% or 2.99%. So there were nearly 1 million weapons crafted. If we take the 20% of that were actually crafted with scarabs, so they have a decent chance to roll this perk, then we are at 189,000 legendary weapons. Of these weapons, with this 3% perk chance, 5,657 would have rolled our personal best in slot. At this point you may be saying, but there are certain perks that have a much higher chance, and that is true. Those are typically perks like Keen and Vicious. Thing is, those are outliers and not exactly the best perks for most weapons. There are very few weapons that make good use of Vicious in PvP especially, so this is already limited in that regard, and there are also other perks that are a lot more rare, so depending on what exactly you're looking for and what you're rolling with, you can have a higher or lower chance than this, but I think 3% is a pretty good average. But there aren't actually 5,600 best in slot greatswords that were rolled in total, because we also have to keep in mind that there are 14 weapons in New World, and all of them are in the same legendary weapons pool. So we have to divide this number by 14, which brings us to a wonderful 404 not found greatswords. This is obviously, again, somewhat skewed because not every weapon gets rolled equally. I'm sure there are plenty more great axes being rolled than fire staffs, for example, but the average should end up somewhere around this number. Keep in mind that while there were some assumptions being made to arrive at this number, even if the assumptions are off in one direction or the other, we're gonna see maybe a shift towards 300 weapons or towards 500 weapons, but it will stay in the same area. But that is just one part of the equation, because we also need to look at the weapons crafted without a scarab. In this case, again, we're starting with nearly 1 million crafted legendary weapons, and now we're taking the 50% of weapons that we assume that have been crafted without a scarab and are random rolls that are legendary. We're ending up with 472,000 legendary weapons. But now the chance to actually get the weapon that we want, our best in slot, is much lower. Say we want to have a particular chain effect along with Keenly Jagged, because you can't actually free roll attunement, and we lock our Transient Strikes. Then we would have a 1.7% chance to get this chain effect, and then a 3% chance to have the Keenly Jagged effect afterwards. The chance to get the item you want this way is brutally low, and we end up with 240 legendary weapons that actually have the effects that we want. Dividing that by the 14 existing weapons, we are down to 17 weapons that actually have the perks that we want. And that combined with the scarab crafted weapons brings us to 421 weapons that are best in slot. Or more specifically, 421 greatswords that are best in slot. 421 greatswords in a game where the concurrent player population, so players being online at the same time, reaches around 40,000 players or higher depending on when exactly you want to look at it, is nothing. And it's also an explanation why some items are going for more than gold cap. Best in slot in New World is so stupid rare that even if we take all of the crafts made throughout the year and consider very generous circumstances, we barely get any. But hey, you could say weapons are maybe just an outlier. Let's look at the armor, where things are a little bit different. We're assuming the same odds here, with 50% of the armor rolling random legendary with no scarab, 20% with the scarab. You know how it goes. The armor that we're crafting are just some Shadewalker gloves. We're gonna lock Resilient and Shirking Fortification and try to roll Freedom. You could lock Shirking Fortification and Freedom and pray for a legendary, because it then has a relatively high chance to get Resilient, but every craft that doesn't hit that would be completely wasted, so I think it's better to roll Resilient, Shirking Fortification, and pray for any sort of useful third perk. This results in a near 7% chance to roll Freedom. We're doing the same thing for the scarab calculation here that we did with the weapon. We have 2.5 million crafted. If we assume 20% of them being scarab crafted, that is roughly 500,000. And with the chance to roll a best in slot, that gives us 35,379 best in slot pieces. Not that bad by itself, but we again have to consider that all of the armor pieces are included here. So light armor with the 5 different pieces, medium armor, heavy armor, and the 3 jewelry slots as well. Maybe also shields, but we're just gonna leave them out. So if we divide that by 18, then 1,965 best in slot armor pieces per armor slot and armor type have been crafted. Again, there's probably not as much medium being crafted as light, and there's probably more jewelry crafted than anything else. You get the idea, it's an average. And if we're doing the same calculation without a scarab again, then we have a best in slot roll chance of 2.73 to get Shirking Fortification, and then a 6.93 chance to get Freedom, which gives us a total of 134 best in slot pieces per armor slot and armor type from random rolls, meaning a grand total of 2,100 pieces. 2,100 pieces where you compete with everyone else that is using the same armor class, and you better pray that the piece that has been crafted has the attributes that you prefer. I think I don't need to emphasize again why this is a problem. It is so incredibly hard to get best in slot gear in New World that at the moment, with the amount of crafting being done, it's just a ridiculously low chance to ever get what you exactly want. Obviously, there are many alternative options, second best in slot things like Elemental Aversion for many players, for example, or having a weapon perk or something else instead of Freedom that you're also okay with. But overall, it is just very hard to even get anything reasonably good, because these chances already only assume legendary rolls. I know that everyone has their own perspective on how rare a best in slot item should be. I personally am a huge fan of getting best in slot from very difficult things, like for example high level raids, but obviously that is not really a thing in New World yet. As it stands, best in slot gear in the open world is also almost non-existent, especially when it comes to PvP gear. And while some of the PvP drops from Outpost Rush or from wars have better perk pools, those come with random attributes, so you have an equal amount of crazy RNG going into that. Based on the numbers we're seeing, I think crafting in New World still needs a massive overhaul, be that a much higher chance to craft legendaries in the first place, or something that influences what type of perks you will get on an armor piece, like making an item roll with the same perk pools as the Outpost Rush items, maybe with a token that you would get from Outpost Rush or something. There are many options, or you could just have more world drops that are actually useful from hidden spots, difficult bosses, long grinds. But just something that makes best in slot not so unobtainable that no one except the biggest RM tiers will ever see a best in slot set. In my opinion, the richest or most successful players should simply be able to have multiple best in slot sets that they can switch between, whereas it should be achievable for dedicated players to reach at least one best in slot set at some point. Now, there were two other interesting stats on this year in review from New World. Before we look at that, a quick reminder, if you enjoyed the video so far, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you get notified of other upcoming videos, like the shield talk we'll do in the next days. Under the legendary items crafted, there were also stats for the most used weapon in 2022, which was the sword. I thought this was kind of funny and interesting because if you look at wars, for example, sword and shield are not particularly popular. They have their niche in arena and Outpost Rush, as well as obviously from tanks in PvE, but I wouldn't have expected it to be the highest number here, considering lifestaff exists, great swords exist, and hatchets exist. However, since there is no distinction between which level these are used on and so on, I'm thinking that this is actually because pretty much every new character will play quite a while with sword until they leave the earliest area. You now get quicker guaranteed access to other weapons as well, but I think that's still a major factor as to why the sword is actually the highest here, not so much it being used the most on level 60. The other one is the weapon that had the most mastery, and that's probably more reflective of which weapon is actually used more, and that was the hatchet. I think if we exclude players below, say, level 30, then the hatchet is likely the most used weapon overall as well. It's a great weapon for leveling because you have that self-sustain. It is a very good weapon for almost all PvE content, solo as well as group content, and it is a decent weapon in PvP as well, the only exception here being wars, where it's not used as much, but wars are really just a fraction of the overall playtime in the game anyways. I thought this part was kind of interesting to look at. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you for the next one soon. SLOTH, out.